Welcome to Never Going Back, an optimistic, conversational, thought-provoking commentary on Paul's letter to the Galatians. My hope is that you'll gain a better understanding of the New Testament and be encouraged in your daily living. Now, here's today's conversation. Then it pleased him to reveal his Son to me so that I would proclaim the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles. And that's what it took. It took God revealing his Son to Paul. I mean, he was around. Paul knew he was alive when Jesus lived, and he may have heard about him. He may have heard him at some time. I don't know. It's hard to say, but but he wasn't revealed to him. He didn't know Jesus. He knew about him, but he was pleased to reveal his Son to me so that I would proclaim the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles. Turns out that's his mission, is to the Gentiles. When this happened, I did not rush out to consult with any human being. Now that's kind of interesting, because you'd think he'd want to go check with the disciples and say, hey, here's what Jesus told me. You want to compare notes? I mean, that's what I'd want to do, but he didn't. He didn't go talk to anybody. He didn't rush out to consult with any human being or the disciples or Plato followers or anybody. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to consult with those who were apostles before I was. He knew who they were. Instead, I went away into Arabia, and later I returned to the city of Damascus. I guess he finally got there. Remember, this all started on the road to Damascus? And he got the scales on his eyes and Acts and everything. Well, he had a detour. Have you ever had any detours in your life where you're headed one way and God says, you'll get there eventually, but not directly? You probably have. Then, 3 years later, okay, I didn't go talk to anybody right away. I went into Arabia, returned to Damascus, and then 3 years later, that's a pretty long time, but it gets even longer than that as time goes on here. But 3 years later, I went to Jerusalem to get to know Peter, and I stayed with him for 15 days. I'll bet that was, but I love to hear that conversation. Talk about writing a great novel or a book. What kind of conversations did they have, and how did they start out? Hey, I'm Paul. You know, the guy that used to persecute the Christians, I'm a Christian now. And Peter probably closed the door on him like you do the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. And he kept knocking and go, hey, no, really, let's talk. So it's hard to know what happened. But he stayed with them for 15 days. The only other apostle I met at that time was James, the Lord's brother. Apparently, at least one of his brothers kind of came around to Christianity, and prophets aren't welcome in their own country, and family members, if they got something going, and they, especially if they're going to be the Son of God, no, they're family members, they know them too well. Although I would think the brothers and sisters of Jesus kind of knew there's something different about this guy. He never got in trouble, or if he did, his mom was out of line, but they probably despised that. Can you imagine being the sibling of Jesus? He could never live up to it. And he was just being himself. He's probably the nicest guy you ever met. And always did everything right and didn't overreact and blah, blah, blah. So they didn't buy it. But at some point, James, his brother, came around after the death and resurrection and was really committed to the whole thing. In fact, as if I understand it, it was kind of like James was supposed to be the heir to Jesus, and in Christianity, he's in Jerusalem. He becomes an elder. He kind of leads the council and different things. I don't think this is the same James that wrote the book of James. Okay, there were a lot of Jameses, but this James was the brother of Jesus, and Paul met him too. I declare before God that what I'm writing to you is not a lie. Now, to me, that's a funny statement, because a liar will tell you that too, right? A liar's not going to say, I tell you in the name of God, I'm lying to you. So false prophets always claim to be true ones, and liars always say they're not lying. But he does say this, and it's still to his credit, because he's saying, look, I'm not fooling around here. I'm not hedging. I'm not thinking maybe I'm right. I'm telling you the truth. This is what happened. So you kind of have to do with Paul what you did with Jesus to some degree. You either say, this guy's the real deal, or he's a big fat liar and a nutcase, and he goes around saying he got revelation from Jesus, who already died and raised from the dead. And I'll bet the apostles, the original apostles, struggled with that a little bit. Did he really, or is he fooling us? So I think it took probably more than 15 days is not that long. Paul's making a very definite claim here, and he's not hedging it at all. I'm telling you the truth. After that, I went north to the provinces of Syria and Cilicia. And still, the Christians in the churches in Judea didn't know me personally. Who wants to get to know the guy that's dragging people out of the houses and killing them? All they knew was that people were saying the one who used to persecute us is now preaching the very faith he tried to destroy. And they praised God because of me. They were probably still a little cautious. I would be. Hey, George, you go talk to this Paul guy and find out if he's real and let me know, because I don't want to get tricked into getting persecuted. But they slowly came around. And, and that's kind of a good lesson. When I raised my kids, especially my daughter, I told her it only takes a minute, a second, to lose my trust by something you do. I said it takes a long time to get it back. It's too bad it's like that, but it takes a long time to build trust and rebuild trust after you've lied or cheated or wasn't honest with somebody. And Paul had a long hike to take, but once he did, he gained a great deal of respect, partly because of his life changed, partly, and I don't know, maybe God revealed to them that, Paul's my guy. I imagine you had some of that going on. What I wonder is, why didn't Paul, when he's out in Arabia talking to Jesus, why didn't God arrange for the disciples to go out there and see him and see them together and have a reunion and have a teaching time and really bring them together? Why did these apostles have to have faith that you went and talked to Jesus and we weren't with you? I mean, that seems peculiar to me, but that's what he's claiming that happened. And so it makes him all the more difficult to receive, because, okay, you go off in the desert and you get together with Jesus and he tells you a bunch of stuff and you no longer persecute the Christians and you weren't one of the original 12 and now you want to be one of us? I mean, he had a big hurdle to clear. And perhaps God wanted it to be that way so that when it happened, it would be spectacular. It would be solid. He would have had to go through some real heartfelt things, and he'll have to get to know them. See, he says churches didn't really know me personally, so this took time, and that's true of anybody you get to know. I meet a lot of people, and I met Steve McVeigh for the first time. Of course, I know something about him, but I think very highly of him. But to really, really, really trust him, I would have to get to know him better. And he'd probably thinking that of me. And that's fine. That's the beauty of really getting to know somebody and saying, I trust you as a fellow believer. Not just you're a fellow believer and I love you. I actually trust you. I trust your judgment. I know you're not going to betray me. Yeah, go ahead.
Don't you think also that the reason he didn't go out there is he had a completely different message than the apostles? His message was different.
Not completely, but it was different. It had a different take.
In a way it was. Think about this. His message was Jesus Christ and him crucified.
Yep.
Peter and 11, their message was, you're going to be crucified? No, you're not going to be crucified. Mm-hmm. Evidently, you're not the Lord of glory. So I'm going to go back fishing.
Oh, that message. Yeah.
But because the message, there's only one message out there, and it's out there today. And that's Jesus Christ and him crucified.
Yeah.
He is everything in our lives And everything that we have to do has to do with the crucifixion and the love of God displayed there. And so I think that he was very leery about going out there saying to them, this was not a mistake. This was before the foundation of the world.
Right.
The Father done seen all of us and said, my son
Yeah.
has volunteered to go up there and to deliver you. And of course, once they heard that message, they were thrilled to death with it. But it took them a while to get used to that message of deliverance, because it was delivered to Paul. It really wasn't delivered to Peter.
I know that's got to be an edgy thing for them, and that set up some tension. And God may have done that to humble them. He brings it to this outsider, but he humbled the outsider because he used to persecute the Christians. So he just got a way of humbling everybody. Yeah. And there was tension between, Paul even mentioned, like I said, he mentioned somewhere the super apostles. There was a little bit of edginess toward them. Competition, that happens in ministry, but they did receive him and they did look at his message and they go, because after Jesus rose from the dead, Peter and John, they all understood that what the message was in the salvation. But you're right, but now James, when he wrote, he's trying to parrot everything Jesus said. It's very much from the Gospels. Paul doesn't spend a lot of time quoting Jesus and saying, let me exegete what Jesus said when he gave a parable. He said, I want to preach him and him crucified. In other words, the person and work of Jesus more than his teachings. Isn't that interesting? That was his message, was who Jesus is and what he did, not, he told all these parables and let's go over them again.
His message was a relationship.
Yes.
It wasn't like we say Bible doctrine. You open up the Bible and said, okay, this is it. We're going to live by this and we're going to do that. No,
that's right.
If you're going to live, you're going to live with him in this, because that's what it's all about. It's not about the letter of the word will kill you. I mean, it's as simple as that. It'll kill you. Yep.
Because he was presenting a person to have a relationship with, not a set of doctrines. I mean, even though he gives some doctrines and teachings and stuff, but Paul is not he doesn't do systematic theology. He really doesn't. I mean, that's what people do when they're trying to speculate and figure it out. I've read them all, and I go, I'll go back to Jesus and relationship and Paul any day. In fact, he's so disciplined to not do that. It almost makes the New Testament miraculous of what's not in there, because it's not your typical religious book. And it's not very religious at all, to tell you the truth. That's a good point. Thanks, Bill. That's really good. Good distinction. Okay, we got through chapter 1. It gets real interesting in 2. It's kind of an interlude before he jumps in 3 and says, who has bewitched you? I mean, he gets back on his theme. You guys are deceived, and it gets really interesting. But 2 is important. A lot of interesting principles in 2 that we'll talk about. It'll be good. Donnie, you picked a good book.
Oh, well, Bill seconded the motion, so.
Well, that's because you paid him. No, it's good. It's good. I'm happy to do this. Hey, and I thought, just looking ahead a little bit, I don't know what you think, but we could just march through Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians. They're really good. And we've already done Colossians, so there we'd have that set. We're in the book of Galatians, Paul's letter to the Christians in Galatia. It was actually a region. It's modern-day Turkey, and it was probably to a bunch of churches there. And so we did chapter 1 last week, but I want to just go back and review just a little bit, because he really sets this up, this whole thing of, I think, he's telling everybody what the good news is. And the whole book is demonstrating what the good news is, because what's interesting, if we go dig into verse 6, he doesn't tell you what the good news is in the beginning of the book. He just tells you, he says, I'm shocked that you are turning away so soon from God, who called you to himself through the loving mercy of Christ. You're following a different way that pretends to be the good news, but it's not the good news at all. You're being fooled by those who are deliberately twisting the truth about Christ, concerning Christ. Let God's curse fall on anyone, including us, even me, even the apostles, or even an angel from heaven, doesn't matter who preaches or proclaims a different kind of good news than the one we preach to you. Okay, the one we gave you is the right one, even if we come back and say, oh no, we got a better one. Don't believe us. And I say again, he says this just a little different direction. I say again, what we have said before, if anyone preaches or proclaims any other good news than the one you welcomed, let that person be cursed. So he's saying, this good news is what I proclaimed to you, and it's also the good news that you received. So both directions. So stick with the one you heard, stick with the one you heard and you knew it was true, and don't go back to anything else and don't go over to anything else. But he doesn't say what it is. Okay, he never tells you what the good news is. It's like you're supposed to know. And I think they did know because they'd already experienced it and they were moving away from it. But the reader of this letter, from our perspective, doesn't know. But that's what he's going to spend the rest of the 5 chapters talking about. Obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I wouldn't be Christ's servant. So he goes into this little thing of, he gets down verse 15, but even before I was born, God chose me and called me by his marvelous grace. Then it pleased him to reveal his Son to me so that I would proclaim the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles, to all the non-Jewish people. Because, this started out a Jewish endeavor, I guess you'd call it, right within the context of Judaism. It was followers of Christ. They were following the Rabbi Jesus, who died on the cross instead of the Jewish system. So Paul began to spread this out to the non-Jews all over the known world. And man, did he do it. And it's amazing what he accomplished. And God did it all through one guy. I mean, I would think God would want 10 Pauls out there. But he didn't need 10. He didn't need any. Okay, he didn't even need any. But he provided one and said, I'll tell you what. I'm going to go grab the most zealous Jew that hates the Christians and is killing them. And I'm going to convert him over just to show you I can convert anybody. If I want to force people to, or make it clear, I can. And he's going to become the most zealous evangelist for the good news to the whole world, the known world. And he was. And that contrast is really amazing. And he picked a smart guy too. And probably a high-ranking, Paul probably had the benefit package, and he wasn't cleaning the toilets. He was Pharisee of Pharisees, he called himself. But then later he says, I count it all rubbish. All that stuff I had, it's rubbish compared to knowing Christ. And that's why you never worry about the con man pastors who get away with stuff, whether they're fooling themselves or whether they know they're fooling people. You'd never want to trade places with them. So he goes on and says, when this happened, I didn't rush out to consult with any human being when God called me, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to consult with those who were apostles before I was. You'd think he would. Hey, guys, I got this revelation from God. Let's compare notes. No, instead, I went away into Arabia and later returned to the city of Damascus. Remember, that's where he was headed, the road to Damascus. And he kind of got interrupted. Then 3 years later, I went to Jerusalem to get to know Peter and stayed with him for 15 days. I'll bet that was a discussion to listen to. I wish they'd recorded it. That would have been a heck of a thing. The only other apostle I met at that time was James, the Lord's brother. I declare before God that what I'm writing to you is not a lie. Now, I always thought this is kind of funny because a liar would say the same thing. No, I'm not lying. But, he's saying, look, I'm giving it straight to you. This is what happened. After that visit, I went north to the provinces of Syria and Cilicia And still, the Christians in the churches in Judea did not know me personally. Yeah, I guess not. Anybody want to know Paul, the guy that drags people out of the houses and kills them? Yeah, I want to get to know the new Christian on the block. All they knew was that people were saying the one who used to persecute us is now preaching the very faith he tried to destroy. And they praised God because of me. But they were probably a little cautious too. It's just my guess. So yeah, the opposite of the gospel is not sin. It's hypocrisy and arrogance and pride. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There you go. So and like I said, he didn't need 10 Pauls. He didn't need any, but he grabbed this one and said, I'm going to give you the most stark contrast possible so anybody can make it. So Paul called himself the chief of sinners, probably because he knew his own life and knew even the struggle he still had, but he also he never lived down completely. I mean, he understood he was saved by grace and not law and all that stuff, but you'd still struggle with having done what you did. I mean, we all struggle with things we've done, even though we know we're forgiven and God forgives us and all that. You still kind of go, boy, man, I wished I hadn't done that, but that's part of life. Jesus wasn't hard on the sinners.
No.
He said, hey, go and sin no more. I mean, don't sin. It's killing you. I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. He hung out with the sinners and the tax collectors and the harlots and all of them, not because he was approving their life, but because he knew that they knew who they were, and the Pharisees don't realize who they are. That's the problem. The sinners knew they were sinners. You'd have to say, you know what? I got to give you the bad news first. You're a sinner. Did you know that? And they'd go, of course I know that, So they were already ready. They were ready to hear the good news, whereas the Pharisees were not. They weren't even ready to hear it. They didn't even think they had a need. Amazing. But Paul's conversion shows God can turn anybody around, and that he will eventually turn everybody around in eternity, because he's going to reconcile everybody to himself. Okay, any thoughts on that before we go into chapter 2? Because he continues on. He says then, it's really interesting. He didn't go talk to the apostles. He waited. How long was it? Was it 3 years before he went to Jerusalem, then talked to Peter and James, and that was it. And then he says, then 14 years later. Man, this is like one of those books where you see the little scene, and then they go, and 14 years later, and you wonder what happened during the 14 years. Well, we can guess, but you do see a changed life. So 14 years later, I went back to Jerusalem again, this time with Barnabas. So that 14 years, he did a lot of thinking. He may have spent time getting revelation from Christ in some way, getting over his background, thinking it through. You ever gone through something, and there's something about going through a period of time that gives you some distance? You probably get this in counseling, Donna. They need distance from time. Has its own sense of healing, maybe not completely, but there's a lot that happens over time when you get perspective. And so God,
insight,
so Paul didn't just jump right into this and go, and I got the good news. He thought about it. He pondered it. He learned. He probably studied the Old Testament with a new perspective, and learned from other people from Jesus and from other people what he had missed, because he wasn't one of the original disciples. So 14 years, I went back to Jerusalem again, this time with Barnabas, and Titus came with us. So you got a little trio there. Remember, Titus was a young guy that he wrote a letter to, and Barnabas, he wrote a letter that almost made it into the New Testament, and who knows, maybe it should have been in there, and a couple of the ones we have shouldn't be. I wonder about that, but anyway, we got what we got, and this is this letter from Paul, Galatians, and all of Paul's letters, and the book of Acts, and the 4 Gospels, and 1 Peter and 1 John. Those books have never been really disputed. It's the other 7 books that kind of got accepted in the 4th century, and there were people hesitant about them. And that's a whole different story, but this is one of those solid books in the New Testament, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, all of Paul's letters, that are very solid and always have been a basis for the Christian faith. I went there because God revealed to me that I should go. Well, that's a good reason. While I was there, I met privately with those considered to be leaders of the church and shared with them the message I had been preaching to the Gentiles. So he goes and meets with them, says, here's the message I'm given to the non-Jews. What do you think? I wanted to make sure that we were in agreement, for fear that all my efforts had been wasted and I was running the race for nothing. I mean, I guess it's okay to be insecure about your ministry, you know? It's normal. It's human. I like Paul because he's real. He's not like an idealistic, perfect guy that got it all worked out. He struggles. He struggles with things. He wonders if he's wasting his time. And they supported me and did not even demand that my companion, Titus, be circumcised, though he was a Gentile. Now, that's a big thing for these Jewish Christians, because they wanted to hang on to the rituals and the law and a lot of stuff and kind of mingle them, which is what this whole letter of Galatians is about. So he was really happy. He told them, and they said, yeah, we accept Titus. He doesn't have to, he's a Gentile. He doesn't have to do circumcision or other rituals. Rituals are okay as long as you realize the ritual itself is not the thing. It points to something. And if you don't want to do the ritual, you don't have to. You don't have to do the cross. You don't have to do communion. You don't have to do baptism. You don't have to do anything. But if those things enhance your relationship with God, enhance the real thing that they represent, that's fine. It's when people start making those rules and regulations and requirements and start lording over other people that's what religion is. You start controlling people with rules and regulations that you've come up with. And Paul's going to disclose all this stuff throughout the letter as we move on. Thank you for watching this presentation of the Common Sense Commentary Series. Remember, God loves you more than you will ever know, and He will never leave or forsake you. Just put your trust in Him. If you have a question or a comment, you can contact me atccliftonjones.com. That'sccliftonjones.com. Now, go and enjoy your daily walk with God.